On Labor Day weekend, exactly 11 minutes after the dessert plates were cleared, my husband stood up at the head of the table and announced he was in love with someone else. The private dining room we had rented cost $3,200 for the night. He decided that was the perfect place to end our marriage. My name is Claire Bennett. I was 32 years old that night, and that was the moment everyone expected me to fall apart. Before I tell you what actually happened, I want to ask you something. If you're watching this right now, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. And if you've ever had someone betray you so calmly it felt almost rehearsed, hit the like button and subscribe, because sometimes the quietest revenge takes the longest time to understand. That dinner was supposed to celebrate our 8th wedding anniversary. The restaurant was located on the rooftop of a luxury hotel overlooking the Chicago skyline. My husband, Marcus Hale, insisted on inviting his entire family. He said it would make the night more meaningful. Marcus was 37 years old, the founder of a cybersecurity startup that had just raised $28 million in venture capital funding. His parents were there, his younger sister, his business partner, and the woman he was secretly sleeping with. I didn't know that last part yet. The room was glowing with soft amber lights reflecting off the floor-to-ceiling windows. Chicago looked beautiful that night. The lake was calm. The city lights shimmered like glass. Everything looked perfect. Marcus tapped a champagne glass with a fork. The sharp ringing sound cut through the room instantly. Everyone turned to look at him. He stood slowly, adjusting the cuff of his expensive navy suit like he was about to give a keynote speech at a tech conference. I smiled politely. I expected a romantic toast. Instead, he cleared his throat and said something that made the entire table freeze. He said he could no longer live a lie. He said life was too short to stay married to someone who didn't understand his vision anymore. Then he looked toward the restaurant entrance. Right on cue, a woman walked in. Her name was Lauren Bishop. She was 27 years old and the new marketing director at Marcus's company. She walked across the dining room floor like she belonged there. Tall heels, black dress, perfect makeup, no hesitation. Marcus reached out and took her hand. And then he kissed her, right in front of me. 8 years of marriage ended in about 4 seconds. Nobody at the table stopped him. Nobody even looked shocked. That was the first moment I realized something important. This wasn't spontaneous. They had planned this. Marcus finally pulled away from Lauren and looked down at me with a strange mixture of pity and superiority. He told me he wanted a divorce, immediately, right there at the table. He said Lauren understood his ambition in ways I never had. He said she believed in the future he was building. I stayed completely still. Inside my chest, my heart was beating so hard it felt like it might break through my ribs. But my face stayed calm, because I was remembering something. 10 years earlier, Marcus was not a successful tech founder. 10 years earlier, he was a broke graduate student living in a one-bedroom apartment that smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. I remembered the night he cried on our kitchen floor because his startup idea kept getting rejected by investors. I remembered working double shifts while finishing my graduate degree. I remembered transferring $38,000 from my own savings to keep his company alive during the first year. I remembered writing the financial projections he used to convince investors he knew what he was doing. Marcus liked to tell people he built his company from nothing. That was not entirely accurate. The entire table was staring at me, waiting. His mother, Patricia Hale, leaned forward in her chair. Patricia had never liked me. She believed her son deserved someone from a better background. I grew up in Ohio, in a working-class family. My father drove trucks. My mother worked nights at a hospital laundry facility. Patricia came from generational wealth. To her, I was a temporary mistake. And tonight, she looked almost excited. She patted Marcus's arm gently and told him she was proud of him for being honest about his happiness. Honest. That was the word she chose. His sister Megan laughed quietly into her wine glass and muttered that she always knew Marcus needed someone more dynamic. Lauren stood beside him, smiling like she had just won an award. The only person who looked uncomfortable was Daniel Cruz. Daniel was Marcus's business partner and the company's chief technology officer. He was sitting across the table, watching the scene unfold with tight shoulders and clenched hands. When our eyes met, he looked like he wanted to say something. I gave him the smallest shake of my head. Not now. Marcus mistook my silence for weakness. He leaned forward slightly and slid a document across the table toward me. It was a divorce settlement agreement, already prepared, already printed, already signed by him. He said his lawyers recommended handling everything quickly before the company's upcoming Series C funding round next month. He told me if I cooperated, he was willing to give me a generous settlement. The number written in the document was $150,000. 8 years of marriage. $150,000. Marcus folded his arms and waited for me to explode. Everyone did. But something inside my brain had already shifted into a different mode, because my profession trained me to do exactly that. You see, I'm not just some quiet wife who married a tech founder. I'm a financial forensic analyst. For the past 7 years, I've worked for a consulting firm that investigates corporate fraud, tax evasion, and internal embezzlement. My job is literally to find the tiny inconsistencies that destroy entire companies. And Marcus had just handed me a legal document that assumed I knew nothing about his finances. I slowly picked up the pen beside my plate. Marcus blinked. He clearly expected an argument. Instead, I flipped to the last page of the document and signed my name. The scratching sound of the pen echoed in the silent room. Everyone looked confused. Marcus looked stunned. He asked why I signed without reading the terms. I looked directly at him and said something that would replay in his head for months. I said, "When someone is this eager for a quick deal, it usually means they're hiding something." Then I stood up. No screaming, no crying, no broken glasses. Just silence. I walked out of the private dining room and left them all sitting there. But the truth is, the betrayal didn't start that night. It started almost a year earlier, and by the time Marcus stood up with his champagne glass, I had already begun noticing something strange inside his company's financial reports. Something that didn't make sense. Something worth almost $11 million. I didn't know exactly what it meant yet, but I was about to find out. Because 20 minutes after I left the restaurant, Daniel Cruz followed me into the hotel parking garage. And the first thing he said changed everything. He told me Marcus was lying about the company's finances. Then he handed me a sealed envelope. Inside were 3 printed bank transfers, each worth over $900,000. And none of them went to the company. They went to a private offshore account in Lauren Bishop's name. 2 nights later, at exactly 9:40 p.m., I was sitting alone at my kitchen table, staring at 3 bank transfers worth $2.7 million. And the woman my husband claimed was his true love owned the account. That was the moment I realized something important. This divorce was not just about an affair. It was about money. A lot of money. Before we continue, I'm curious about something. If you were sitting where I was that night, staring at proof your spouse might be stealing from his own company, would you confront him immediately? Or would you stay quiet and keep watching? Tell me in the comments, because what I chose to do next changed everything. I lived in a modern townhouse in Lincoln Park. At least, that's what Marcus believed. Technically, the property was registered under Hale Residential Holdings, LLC. Marcus liked to brag that he bought the place after his first successful funding round. But that wasn't exactly true either. I formed that LLC 3 years earlier with my own savings and purchased the house outright for $1.8 million. Marcus assumed his income covered the mortgage. In reality, he had been paying monthly rent to a company he didn't know I owned. When you work in financial investigations long enough, you learn to protect yourself quietly. That habit saved my life later. I spread the documents Daniel gave me across the table. 3 transfers, each routed through a shell consulting vendor called Stratton Digital Solutions. I had never heard of them, but I immediately noticed something strange. The payments were marked as marketing expansion costs. That alone made no sense. Marcus's company built cybersecurity software for mid-sized financial institutions. Their marketing budget had always been tightly controlled. No one suddenly spends millions on marketing consultants without documentation, unless the consultant isn't real. I opened my laptop. Within 10 minutes, I confirmed Stratton Digital Solutions did exist. Technically, it was registered in Delaware 6 months earlier. The company had no employees, no office address, no website, just a registered agent, which meant one thing: shell company. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. There are moments in life when everything shifts quietly, not dramatically, just a small click in your mind when the truth begins forming. Marcus wasn't just cheating on me, he was stealing from his own investors. The next morning, my phone rang at 7:12 a.m. Marcus. I answered. His voice sounded strangely cheerful. He asked if I had time to meet with his lawyer later that afternoon. Apparently, he wanted to finalize the divorce paperwork quickly so everyone could move on peacefully. Peacefully. I almost laughed. I told him I would meet them at 3 p.m. Then I hung up. The meeting took place in a glass conference room overlooking Michigan Avenue. Marcus arrived with Lauren and a sharply dressed attorney named Stephen Holloway. Holloway specialized in high-net-worth divorces. His hourly rate was probably higher than most people's weekly paycheck. Marcus looked relaxed, almost relieved. He believed the situation was under control. Lauren sat beside him, scrolling through her phone like the meeting bored her. Stephen Holloway pushed a new document across the table toward me, a revised settlement. Marcus was offering $200,000 now. Apparently, my quick signature at the restaurant made him nervous. He wanted additional guarantees, specifically a non-disclosure clause, preventing me from discussing any internal financial information related to his company. That detail was very interesting. I looked up from the document and asked Marcus a simple question. Why would I have financial information about your company? He hesitated. Only for a moment, but it was enough. Stephen quickly jumped in, explaining that it was just standard language used when divorcing business owners. Standard. Right. I flipped through the document slowly. Marcus kept watching me, waiting for another signature. Instead, I closed the folder. I told him I needed 48 hours to review everything. Marcus frowned. He said the deal might not be available if I waited. I looked him straight in the eyes and said something he clearly didn't expect. If you're rushing this hard, Marcus, it usually means you're scared. Lauren rolled her eyes dramatically. She leaned forward and said I should stop pretending I was smarter than everyone else in the room. She told me Marcus built a $30 million company while I worked behind spreadsheets. Then she said something that made the entire room go quiet. She said, "You should be grateful he's offering anything." Marcus didn't correct her. He didn't even look embarrassed. That told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just an affair. They were partners in something bigger. I stood up, told them I'd send my answer by Friday, and walked out. But instead of going home, I drove straight to a quiet coffee shop near my office. Daniel Cruz was already waiting for me. He looked exhausted. He had dark circles under his eyes and a laptop open in front of him. When I sat down, he didn't waste time. He turned the laptop toward me. The screen displayed the internal accounting dashboard of Marcus's company. Revenue projections, expense reports, investor funding summaries. Daniel lowered his voice. He said something had been wrong with the company finances for months. Marcus kept overriding budget approvals, large transfers labeled as research expenses, marketing experiments, vendor payments. None of it made sense. Daniel finally started digging. That's when he discovered Stratton Digital Solutions. He traced the company registration. The listed contact email belonged to Lauren Bishop. Then he showed me something worse. Another spreadsheet. This one displayed company debt. The company had raised $28 million in venture capital funding, but only $4.3 million remained in operational accounts. The rest was gone, burned through in less than a year. or moved somewhere else. Daniel leaned back in his chair and quietly said the words that changed the entire situation. Marcus isn't preparing for the next funding round. He's preparing to disappear. I stared at the screen. If Daniel was right, Marcus wasn't just stealing money. He was planning an exit. A fraudulent one. Startups collapse all the time, but when founders drain company funds before disappearing, federal investigators get involved. Wire fraud, securities fraud, prison. Daniel closed the laptop. Then he asked me something unexpected. He asked if I had signed the divorce settlement yet. I shook my head. He exhaled slowly. Good, because if Marcus files before the investigation starts, he might try to shift some of the liability onto you. I felt a cold chill move through my chest. Marcus had rushed the divorce for a reason. Legal separation could protect him from shared financial liability. He wasn't just leaving me, he was using me as a shield. Daniel reached into his backpack and pulled out a small external hard drive. He placed it on the table between us. This contains copies of the internal transaction logs, server backups, investor contracts, everything I could safely download without triggering security alerts. I stared at the small black drive. That device probably contained enough evidence to destroy Marcus's entire career. Daniel pushed it toward me. You're better at this than I am, Claire. You know how to find the real story in the numbers. Then he said something that still gives me chills. Marcus is planning a huge announcement next month, a major acquisition. If he pulls it off, investors will never realize the money is gone until it's too late. I asked him who was buying the company. Daniel shook his head. That's the problem. No one. Marcus was planning to sell a company that technically no longer existed. And the deeper I looked into those files that night, the more I realized something terrifying. Marcus wasn't acting alone. Someone inside the investor group was helping him hide the missing money. And the first name that appeared in those financial records was someone I never expected. 3 days after the anniversary dinner, at exactly 6:15 in the morning, I opened a financial ledger that showed $9.4 million missing from Marcus's company. And one of the approvals had my name on it. Except I had never signed it. That was the moment I realized the situation had become far more dangerous than a cheating husband and a messy divorce. Someone was forging my identity. If you've ever discovered someone using your name to hide their own crimes, tell me in the comments. Because what I found next made it clear this wasn't just betrayal. It was a setup. I sat at my dining table with Daniel's external drive connected to my laptop. My coffee had gone cold hours earlier. The sun was already rising over Chicago, but I barely noticed. Rows of transaction records filled the screen. Dates, routing numbers, vendor accounts, internal approval signatures. The deeper I looked, the worse it became. Marcus's company, Sentinel Shield Technologies, had raised $28 million from 3 venture capital firms during the last funding round. According to official investor reports, about $21 million of that money was allocated for product development and security infrastructure. But the internal ledger told a completely different story. Only $8.7 million had actually gone toward development. The rest had been routed through a chain of vendor accounts, most of them fake, shell consulting firms, marketing agencies that didn't exist, contractor payments with no employees attached. Classic laundering structure. But then I noticed something strange in the authorization column. Each large transfer required 2 approvals. Marcus's name and mine. Except I had never approved any of them. Not once. I opened one of the authorization files. It displayed a digital approval signature under my name. Claire Bennett, timestamped 6 months earlier. I zoomed in on the metadata. The signature came from an IP address inside the Sentinel Shield office network, which meant whoever created it had direct access to their internal system. Someone inside the company had forged my approval. That meant 2 things. First, Marcus needed my identity attached to the transactions. Second, he wanted investigators to believe I was involved. I leaned back in my chair slowly. For years, Marcus had mocked my career. He told people forensic accounting was boring. He used to joke that my job was just staring at spreadsheets all day. But those spreadsheets were now the only thing protecting me. I opened another folder on Daniel's drive. This one was labeled Board Communications. Inside were archived emails between Marcus and the venture capital firms. The biggest investor was a fund called Alderbridge Capital. They had invested $14 million into Sentinel Shield. The managing partner of Alderbridge was a man named Victor Lang. Victor Lang was 58 years old and widely respected in the tech investment world. He sat on multiple startup boards. He was known for being extremely careful with money, which made the next document almost impossible to believe. 3 months earlier, Victor Lang had approved a $4 million strategic expansion loan to Sentinel Shield. No collateral, no detailed financial audit, just a signature. I stared at the document for several seconds. That wasn't normal. No venture fund hands out money that easily, especially not someone like Victor Lang, unless he believed something that wasn't true. Or he was part of the plan. I kept digging. Another hour passed. Then I found something that made my stomach drop. A scanned internal memo. The subject line read, Operational Restructuring Plan. Marcus wrote it. The document outlined a strategy for relocating Sentinel Shield's intellectual property assets into a new holding company. The company was registered overseas, Cayman Islands. Ownership structure hidden behind nominee directors. Classic asset relocation. If Marcus succeeded, the real technology would move offshore, while the original company collapsed under debt. Investors would lose everything. Marcus would walk away with the product and the money. I whispered something out loud without realizing it. He's planning to burn the company. But there was still one detail that didn't make sense. Marcus was arrogant, reckless, but he wasn't smart enough to build something this complicated alone. Someone else was advising him. I searched the email archives again, this time filtering for outside legal counsel. One name appeared repeatedly, Rachel Whitmore, corporate attorney, Chicago. Specialized in cross-border asset structuring. That was interesting. I knew Rachel Whitmore, not personally, but professionally. 3 years earlier, my firm had assisted federal investigators in a tax fraud case involving one of her former clients. She was brilliant and extremely expensive. Marcus could never afford someone like her unless investors were paying the legal bills, which meant someone on the board approved her involvement. I opened the most recent email between Marcus and Rachel. The timestamp was only 2 days old. The subject line read, Exit Timeline. My chest tightened as I read the message. Rachel warned Marcus that once the Series C funding round closed, financial auditors would begin a mandatory review of company accounts. She wrote that they needed to complete the asset transfer before that audit occurred. Her final sentence sent a cold wave through my entire body. Make sure Claire signs the separation agreement before the transfer date. Liability must be isolated. I read the line 3 times. Marcus wasn't divorcing me because he fell in love with Lauren. He was divorcing me because he planned to commit financial fraud. And he needed me legally separated before investigators started looking. That way, any criminal liability would fall entirely on the company leadership, not his spouse. Except Marcus made one mistake, a big one. He underestimated how closely I read financial documents, and he underestimated how stubborn I could be. My phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. Hello? There was a pause. Then a calm male voice spoke. Is this Claire Bennett? I confirmed. He introduced himself as Michael Garner, Senior Compliance Officer, Alderbridge Capital, Victor Lang's investment firm. My heart slowed. Garner explained that he was calling because my name appeared on several internal approval documents related to Sentinel Shield's financial operations. He said their firm was conducting a routine pre-audit review before the upcoming Series C round. Then he asked a simple question. Did you personally authorize the $3.2 million transfer to Stratton Digital Solutions last quarter? I answered honestly, no. There was a long silence. Then Garner said something that made the situation even more serious. Because according to our records, that approval was submitted from your personal login credentials. My stomach tightened. Marcus didn't just forge my name, he used my credentials, which meant something even worse. Someone had accessed my personal account. Garner told me Alderbridge planned to schedule a board review meeting within the week. He asked if I would be available to confirm the transactions in person. I told him yes. After the call ended, I sat there staring at my laptop. Marcus thought I was the quiet wife who didn't understand his business. But now the investors were starting to ask questions. And once investors start asking questions, things move very quickly. I was about to contact my attorney when my doorbell rang. It was barely 8:30 in the morning. Nobody ever visited unannounced. I walked to the front window and looked outside. A black SUV was parked at the curb. Two men in dark suits were standing on my front steps. One of them held a leather briefcase. They looked like lawyers or investigators. When I opened the door, the taller one introduced himself. He worked for a private legal firm representing Sentinel Shield's board of investors. He handed me an official document, a subpoena request. They were demanding access to all financial records connected to my personal accounts over the past 3 years. Marcus had moved faster than I expected. He wasn't just preparing his escape. He was preparing a scapegoat. Me. But what Marcus didn't know yet was that I had already downloaded every single internal transaction his company ever processed. And buried inside those files was one transfer that even Daniel hadn't noticed. A transfer that happened 11 months earlier. The amount was small, only $48,000. But the destination account belonged to Marcus's mother. On the second Tuesday of October, exactly 17 days before Marcus planned to announce his next funding round, I discovered that his mother had received $48,000 from his company. It was the smallest suspicious transfer in the entire ledger, which is exactly why nobody else noticed it. But when you investigate financial crimes for a living, you learn something very important. The smallest numbers often reveal the biggest lies. Before we go further, I want to ask you something. If you discovered your spouse's family was secretly receiving company money behind the scenes, would you confront them immediately? Or would you stay quiet and watch who else was involved? Let me know in the comments. Because what I did next was not emotional. It was strategic. The transfer occurred 11 months earlier. The sender account belonged to Sentinel Shield Technologies. The receiving account belonged to Patricia Hale, Marcus's mother. The transaction description said consulting services, which was absurd. Patricia Hale had never worked a day in technology. Her entire professional history consisted of charity board memberships and country club committees. She had no reason to receive corporate consulting payments, unless the payment was hiding something else. I pulled up Patricia's public financial records. Her primary bank was a private wealth management branch of First Illinois Trust. That bank specialized in high-net-worth clients. Within 20 minutes, I confirmed the transfer. $48,000. Deposited. Withdrawn 4 days later. Cashier's check issued to another account. I followed the trail. The money had been transferred again. This time to a real estate escrow account, which meant the funds were used to purchase something. I opened the escrow record. The property address appeared on the screen, and my eyebrows lifted slowly. Marcus had bought Lauren a condo. Not a cheap one either. A $1.2 million high-rise unit in West Loop, purchased 8 months earlier. But here's the interesting part. The buyer name on the deed wasn't Lauren, and it wasn't Marcus. It was Patricia Hale. Marcus used his mother as a middleman to hide the purchase. Patricia received the company money, converted it to escrow, then bought the property. Later, the ownership quietly transferred to Lauren, which meant Marcus didn't just cheat. He used investor money to buy his girlfriend an apartment. I leaned back in my chair and whispered something under my breath. Arrogant men always get sloppy. I exported the records, added them to the evidence folder. Then I kept digging. Because the moment you find one hidden payment, you start wondering how many others exist. 2 hours later, I found another. Then another. Small amounts: 5,000, 62,000, 27,000. Always routed through different vendors, always landing in Patricia's account first. Total amount: $312,000. Marcus had been funneling company funds through his mother for almost a year. But the real surprise came when I looked at the timing. The payments started 2 months before Lauren officially joined the company, which meant the relationship began much earlier than Marcus claimed. The affair wasn't a recent development. It had been running in the background for nearly a year. That explained why Patricia seemed so comfortable at the anniversary dinner. She already knew. She had helped pay for it. I saved the documents and closed the laptop. Then I did something Marcus would never expect. I called Patricia Hale. She answered on the third ring. Her voice sounded irritated. "Claire, what do you want?" No greeting, no politeness, just annoyance. I told her I had a quick question about a bank transfer she received last year. Silence filled the line. For almost 5 seconds, she said nothing. Then she laughed, a sharp, unpleasant laugh. She told me I should stop digging into business matters that were none of my concern. I told her something very simple. "Patricia, you received over $300,000 from Marcus's company and used it to purchase a property now occupied by his girlfriend." Another long pause. This time the silence sounded different, less confident. Finally, she spoke. "Marcus told me you were unstable. He said you've been inventing stories to damage his reputation." Her tone turned cold. "You signed the divorce settlement, Claire. You walked away. You should take your money and move on with your life." I almost smiled, because she had just confirmed something important. She believed the divorce was already final. Marcus had clearly told his family the deal was done, but it wasn't. And Patricia had no idea how much evidence I already possessed. I kept my voice calm. "Patricia, one more question. Did you know the money used to buy that condo came from venture capital investors?" The line went silent again. Then she said something that surprised me. She said Marcus promised the funds were approved. She said it was part of a bonus arrangement. I closed my eyes briefly. Marcus hadn't told her the truth, which meant Patricia wasn't part of the core fraud plan. She was just the laundering channel, useful, but not informed. I thanked her politely and ended the call. Then I immediately called Daniel. When he answered, I asked him one question. "Does the company have any internal record of Patricia Hale working as a consultant?" He checked. 30 seconds later, he said no, of course not, which meant the consulting payments were completely fabricated. Another count of fraud, another charge, another piece of leverage. But the most important discovery came an hour later. While reviewing the condo purchase documents again, I noticed something buried in the closing paperwork. The escrow attorney, Rachel Whitmore, the same corporate lawyer helping Marcus move company assets offshore. She handled Lauren's condo purchase, which meant Rachel wasn't just advising Marcus, she was helping hide his personal spending. I stared at the screen. Rachel Whitmore represented Marcus, handled his offshore asset transfers, helped buy property for his mistress, and approved investor loan structures. That wasn't just legal work, that was coordination. Someone that deeply involved usually demands a percentage, and if Rachel Whitmore was taking a percentage, then she would never allow Marcus to walk away with the entire scheme alone. My phone buzzed. A new email notification appeared on my screen. Sender, Marcus Hale. Subject line, Final Settlement Deadline. I opened it. The message was short. "Claire, my attorney says you haven't returned the revised agreement. If you don't sign within 24 hours, we'll proceed with litigation and freeze all marital assets. Marcus." I read the message twice. He thought he still had leverage, which meant he believed I was financially dependent on him. Marcus had never paid attention to my income. He had no idea how much money forensic consultants make when corporations hire them to uncover fraud. I closed the email without replying. Instead, I opened a new folder on my laptop. I labeled it, federal evidence. Because the moment Marcus moved company assets offshore, this situation crossed into federal territory. Wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, and possibly conspiracy. But before any investigator would act, they needed proof, not suspicions, proof. And I had something investigators love more than anything: digital trails, emails, bank transfers, false approvals, fake vendors, and now a real estate purchase tied to stolen funds. I spent the rest of the night organizing everything: every document, every timestamp, every transaction. By the time I finished, the evidence file contained over 600 pages, enough to start an investigation. But I still needed one thing: the final link. The person inside the investor group helping Marcus hide the missing money. Because Daniel's files showed something that still didn't make sense. Someone on the board kept approving emergency loans without audits. Someone powerful. Someone protecting Marcus. And the next morning, I was scheduled to meet him. Victor Lang, managing partner of Alderbridge Capital. The man who invested $14 million into Marcus's company. The man who might either expose the fraud or destroy me to protect it. On Thursday morning at exactly 10:03 a.m., I walked into a conference room where one man controlled $14 million of Marcus's company: Victor Lang. If he was involved in the fraud, my entire plan would collapse before it even started. If he wasn't, Marcus's empire was already finished. Before I tell you what happened in that room, I want to ask you something. If you were about to accuse someone powerful of being connected to financial fraud, would you confront them directly, or would you test them first? Because that decision changed everything for me. Alderbridge Capital occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower near the Chicago River, the kind of office that looked exactly like you expect a venture capital firm to look. Polished marble lobby, security desk, minimalist furniture that probably cost more than most people's cars. Victor Lang's assistant led me to a private conference room overlooking the water. The view was impressive. Victor Lang was already inside. He stood when I entered. He was taller than I expected. Late 50s, silver hair, dark tailored suit. The kind of man who spent his entire life making billion-dollar decisions. But the first thing I noticed wasn't his appearance. It was his expression. He looked irritated. Not defensive, not nervous. I shook his hand. His grip was firm but brief. We sat down across from each other. He didn't waste time with small talk. Ms. Bennett, your name appears on several internal approval signatures for Sentinel Shield. We need clarification. His voice was calm, controlled, professional. I opened my briefcase and placed my laptop on the table. Victor watched carefully. I said something simple. I didn't authorize any of those transactions. He didn't react immediately. Instead, he asked another question. Then why do the digital signatures originate from your credentials? Good question. I rotated the laptop toward him and opened the metadata report I prepared earlier. Because someone inside the company copied my login access months ago. Victor leaned slightly closer to the screen. He read the IP log timestamps. His eyes narrowed. Then he asked the question that confirmed something important. Who else has access to the executive accounting system? I answered immediately. Marcus Hale, Daniel Cruz, and the legal team. Victor looked up. Legal team? I nodded. Rachel Whitmore. For the first time since the meeting started, Victor's expression changed. Not dramatically, but noticeably. His jaw tightened slightly. Interesting, he said quietly. He leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. Tell me something, Ms. Bennett. Do you believe Marcus is stealing from the company? There are moments when you need to measure every word. This was one of them. I didn't accuse Marcus. I didn't raise my voice. I simply opened another document. The condo purchase record. Lauren Bishop's apartment. Purchased through Patricia Hale using Sentinel Shield funds. Victor studied the screen. Then he asked another question. How long have you been investigating this? 2 weeks. That was a lie. but a useful one. Victor leaned back further in his chair. Then he did something I didn't expect. He laughed. Not loudly, just a quiet, amused sound. Marcus always did have terrible impulse control. That single sentence told me everything. Victor Lang had no idea what Marcus was doing. If he had been part of the scheme, he wouldn't have reacted that way. He would have been defensive. Instead, he looked annoyed. And annoyed investors become very dangerous. Victor stood up and walked toward the window. He looked out at the river for a long moment. Then he said something that made my pulse slow. "You understand the consequences if what you're suggesting is true." I nodded. Wire fraud, securities fraud, potentially 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Victor turned back toward me. "And if this accusation is wrong, you're accusing the founder of a $30 million company of criminal activity." Also correct. The room went silent. Then Victor walked back to the table. He sat down slowly and asked the most important question of the meeting. "Do you have more evidence than this?" I opened the external drive Daniel gave me, transferred the folder onto the conference screen. Transaction logs, fake vendors, offshore transfer drafts, asset relocation memos. Victor read quietly. 10 minutes passed, then 15. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask questions. He just read. Finally, he closed the folder and spoke 4 words. "This is very bad." Then he picked up his phone and dialed someone. "Michael," he said calmly, "cancel the Series C roadshow. We're initiating an internal audit." There was a pause on the other end. Victor continued, "Effective immediately." Another pause. Then he hung up. He looked back at me. "Marcus doesn't know about this meeting, does he?" "No." "Good. Because if he finds out, he'll try to move the remaining money." He stood again. Then he said something that completely shifted the situation. "Ms. Bennett, from this moment forward, you are not just a witness. You're part of the investigation." He walked to a locked cabinet and pulled out a folder. Inside were investor agreements, board authority documents, legal response protocols. He placed them on the table. "Marcus still believes he's in control, but legally he answers to the board, and the board answers to me." I nodded slowly. Victor looked directly at me. "Now I have a question for you. Why are you helping us? Most spouses in your situation would just walk away with their divorce settlement." "Fair question," I answered honestly. "Because Marcus used my identity to authorize fraud. If this explodes publicly, my career is finished." Victor studied my face for a moment. Then he nodded. "Fair enough." He closed the folder. "Here's what we're going to do. The audit team will start reviewing internal accounts immediately, but Marcus cannot know the investigation has begun. If he panics, he'll move the offshore assets before we can freeze them." I already knew what he was about to say. "You want me to play along?" Victor smiled slightly. "Exactly. Marcus believes you signed the divorce settlement. Let him believe that. Let him think he's already won. Because arrogant people make their biggest mistakes when they feel safe." I couldn't help smiling at that. Victor Lang understood something most people never learn. Patience destroys liars faster than confrontation. Before I left the office, Victor gave me one final warning. "Rachel Whitmore will try to protect Marcus. If she senses an investigation, she'll move the assets herself. Corporate attorneys like her don't panic. They erase trails." Which meant we had limited time. I walked out of Alderbridge Capital, feeling something I hadn't felt since the anniversary dinner. Control. Marcus thought he was escaping with millions. He thought I was the quiet wife signing paperwork in the background. But the truth was something very different. An internal audit had just begun. The investors were watching, and Marcus was about to make a mistake he could never undo. Because that same night, he invited Lauren and his entire family to celebrate his successful divorce. And he wanted me there. He said it would give us all a chance to say goodbye properly. Marcus thought the night would mark the beginning of his new life. What he didn't know was that by the end of that dinner, he would reveal the one piece of evidence the investors were still missing. 2 weeks after Marcus announced his new relationship, he invited me to a celebration dinner at exactly 8 p.m. The bill for the private room alone was $4,600. He called it a fresh start. I called it an opportunity. Before we go on, I'm curious about something. If the person who betrayed you invited you to dinner to celebrate replacing you, would you go? Or would you stay home and protect your peace? Let me know in the comments. Because showing up that night was one of the most calculated decisions I've ever made. The restaurant was a high-end steakhouse near the Chicago River. Marcus had reserved the entire private dining room. When I walked in, everyone was already seated. Marcus, Lauren, his parents, Patricia and Robert Hale, his sister, Megan, and Daniel Cruz. Daniel's presence surprised me. He sat quietly near the end of the table, clearly uncomfortable. Marcus stood when I entered. He looked confident, almost relieved. He believed everything was under control. "Claire," he said, smiling like we were old friends. "Thanks for coming." Lauren didn't stand. She stayed seated with one leg crossed, slowly sipping a glass of red wine. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe. I had chosen my outfit carefully. Simple black dress, no jewelry, no drama, just quiet confidence. Marcus pulled out a chair for me. I sat down calmly. The table was already covered in expensive food. Imported wine, dry-aged steaks, lobster. Marcus raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he said. Lauren leaned into him and smiled. Everyone else followed his lead. Even Daniel raised his glass, though he didn't look happy about it. Marcus turned toward me. "I want tonight to be civil, Claire." He said the word civil like he was doing me a favor. Lauren laughed quietly. Marcus continued. "The lawyers told me the divorce should finalize within a few days." Then he said something interesting. "After that, the company moves into its next phase." His eyes sparkled with excitement. "The big acquisition announcement happens soon. Investors are thrilled." That statement was technically true. Investors were very interested, just not in the way he thought. Patricia Hale clapped her hands softly. "My son has always been destined for greatness." She looked at Lauren warmly. "And now he finally has the right partner beside him." Lauren smiled modestly. "Thank you, Patricia." She said Marcus deserved someone who understood his level of ambition. Then she glanced at me. "Some people just hold successful men back." Nobody at the table reacted, except Daniel. He looked down at his plate. Marcus cut into a steak and leaned back. "Claire, I hope you understand none of this was personal. Life just moves people in different directions." That line almost made me laugh. Instead, I asked him a simple question. "Marcus, when exactly is the acquisition announcement?" He wiped his mouth with a napkin. "About 3 weeks. Everything's already lined up," Lauren added proudly. "The valuation will probably be around $45 million. I nodded slowly. "Interesting." Daniel shifted in his chair. Marcus continued talking. About the future, about expansion, about how Sentinel Shield was about to dominate the cybersecurity market. He was glowing with confidence. The room buzzed with admiration. Except for one detail. Marcus kept drinking. By the second bottle of wine, his voice was louder. His posture relaxed. The arrogance started spilling out. Exactly what Victor Lang predicted. People reveal the truth when they feel safe. Lauren rested her hand on Marcus's arm. "Tell them about the restructuring plan." Marcus smirked. "You mean the smart part." He leaned forward across the table. "Here's something most investors don't understand. Companies aren't about products. They're about control." Robert Hale looked confused. Marcus continued proudly. "If you move the intellectual property into the right holding structure." He stopped himself, then laughed. "Actually, never mind. Corporate stuff. Too boring." Lauren laughed with him, but Daniel's head snapped up, and I saw the realization in his eyes. Marcus had just almost admitted the plan. Lauren looked at Marcus again. "You're being dramatic. Everyone does asset restructuring." Marcus shrugged. "Exactly. It's just smart business." Then he said the sentence that made the entire evening worth attending. "Sometimes the smartest move is transferring assets before anyone realizes what's happening." Daniel dropped his fork. The metal clattered loudly against the plate. The room went quiet. Marcus frowned. "You okay, Daniel?" Daniel forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." But I saw something else in his expression. Fear. Marcus had just revealed the core strategy of the fraud, and Daniel knew it. Lauren leaned closer to Marcus, whispering something in his ear. Marcus laughed. "Relax. Everything is already handled. The lawyers made sure everything is legal." Lawyers. Plural. Rachel Whitmore. Marcus lifted his wine glass again. "To success." Everyone drank, even Patricia. Except me. I watched, listened, memorized, because every word spoken in that room would matter later. Marcus turned toward me again. "You've been very quiet tonight." I smiled slightly. "Just listening." He nodded. "Well, you won't have to worry about any of this soon. After the divorce clears, our lives go separate directions." Lauren smirked. "That's probably best for everyone." I leaned back in my chair and said something calm enough to sound harmless. "Marcus, one question." He raised an eyebrow. "Sure. Are you certain everything in the company is clean?" The room froze. Marcus stared at me. Lauren rolled her eyes. "Oh, please," she laughed. "You're not still doing your little accountant paranoia thing, are you?" Marcus chuckled. "Claire always thought everyone was committing fraud. That's literally my job." Daniel shifted again. Marcus shook his head. "Everything is perfect. In fact, once the acquisition happens—" He paused and smiled smugly. "I'll probably retire before 40. The table erupted in laughter, except Daniel and me, because Marcus didn't know something. 2 hours earlier, Victor Lang had officially frozen every major corporate account connected to Sentinel Shield. Marcus thought he controlled the company, but the investors now controlled the money, and Marcus was about to find out. Because just as the waiter placed dessert on the table, Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced down casually. Then his smile vanished. His face went pale. Lauren noticed immediately. "What is it?" Marcus didn't answer. He stared at the screen, reading the message again. Then he whispered something under his breath. "That's impossible." I knew exactly what he was reading. The message from Alderbridge Capital. "Internal audit initiated. All financial accounts temporarily restricted, pending investigation." Marcus slowly looked up, and for the first time since I met him, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. But the worst part for him was still coming. Because that message wasn't the only notification waiting on his phone. 5 seconds later, another alert appeared. From his own bank. And this one mentioned the words, "Federal Inquiry." Exactly 12 seconds after Marcus read the second notification on his phone, the color drained from his face. His bank account had just been flagged for a federal compliance review. And suddenly, the celebration dinner wasn't a celebration anymore. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. Have you ever watched someone realize, in real time, that the game they thought they were winning had already ended? Tell me in the comments, because what happened next was one of the quietest collapses I've ever witnessed. Marcus lowered his phone slowly. Lauren leaned closer. "What's wrong?" He didn't answer right away. He stared at the screen again, like the words might change. They didn't. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Just a banking notification." Lauren frowned. "About what?" Marcus forced a laugh. "Routine compliance thing. Nothing serious." But his voice sounded different now. Tighter. Patricia noticed it immediately. "Marcus, are you all right?" Marcus nodded quickly. "Of course, just annoying timing." He reached for his wine glass, but his hand trembled slightly when he lifted it. Most people at the table didn't notice. I did. Daniel did too. Our eyes met for a brief second. He understood exactly what that message meant. An internal audit had started. And once banks see the word investigation connected to a corporate account, they start protecting themselves. Marcus tried to steer the conversation back to normal. So anyway, as I was saying earlier, Lauren jumped in. The company's about to explode, in a good way. She smiled proudly. Marcus has investors lining up. She looked at me again. You should see the numbers. I already had. Marcus forced another smile. Yeah, big things coming. But something inside him had shifted. You could see it in the way he kept checking his phone. Every few minutes. Every vibration making his eyes flick down. Because once panic starts creeping in, it's hard to stop. Halfway through dessert, his phone buzzed again. Marcus grabbed it immediately. His eyes scanned the screen. Then he stood up suddenly. I need to take this. He stepped away from the table and walked toward the hallway. Lauren watched him leave. What's his problem tonight? Patricia waved dismissively. Business. Marcus works harder than anyone I know. Lauren smiled. That's why he's successful. I stayed quiet. Across the table, Daniel picked up his water glass. His hands were steady, but his jaw was tight. He was thinking, calculating, and waiting. Marcus returned 5 minutes later. His smile was back, but it looked forced. Everything good? Patricia asked. Yeah, just the accounting department, asking about some old expense reports. Lauren laughed. Accountants ruin everything. She glanced at me when she said it. Marcus sat down again. But he didn't relax. Instead, he started talking faster about future plans, new office locations, expansion into European markets. The words kept coming, like he was trying to convince himself. Then Daniel spoke, quietly. Marcus. Marcus looked at him. Yeah? Daniel set his glass down. You said the company accounts were clean. Marcus frowned. Of course they are. Daniel leaned slightly forward. Then why would the investors freeze them? The room went silent. Marcus blinked. What? Daniel didn't raise his voice, just repeated the sentence. Why would the investors freeze the accounts? Lauren looked confused. What accounts? Marcus laughed too quickly. Nobody froze anything. Daniel held his gaze. My access to the financial dashboard was restricted tonight. Marcus's smile tightened. That's just part of the audit cycle. Routine. Daniel nodded slowly. Routine. But there's no scheduled audit this quarter. Patricia looked between them nervously. What are you two talking about? Marcus waved his hand. Daniel's just overthinking things. Lauren rolled her eyes. Engineers love drama. But Daniel didn't back down. Marcus, he said calmly, did you move company assets into another holding structure? Lauren looked startled. Marcus slammed his hand lightly on the table. Enough. His voice was sharper now. This is not the place for internal company discussions. Daniel leaned back. Fine. The room fell quiet again. Marcus picked up his wine glass and drained it completely. Then he looked at me, and suddenly his expression hardened. Claire, you've been awfully interested in company finances lately. I shrugged slightly. Occupational habit. Lauren smirked. Marcus's eyes narrowed. Did you talk to the investors? There it was, the question he had been building toward. I met his gaze. No. Technically true. Victor had contacted me first. Marcus stared at me for another moment, trying to read something in my face. Then he leaned back slowly. Good, because that would be a serious mistake. The threat sat quietly in the air. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Patricia clapped her hands nervously. This conversation is ridiculous. We're here to celebrate. Lauren raised her glass again. Exactly. To Marcus. She smiled brightly. The future billionaire. Everyone laughed. Even Marcus forced another smile. But the mood had changed. The room felt colder now. Marcus kept checking his phone. The notifications kept coming. One from his bank, another from the accounting system. Then a third message. This one made him freeze completely. Lauren noticed immediately. Marcus, what is it? He stared at the screen, not speaking. Then he whispered something so quietly only I heard it. they froze the offshore account. My pulse slowed. So Victor's team had moved faster than expected. Marcus stood up again, abruptly. "Dinner's over." Lauren looked confused. "But we haven't—" "We're leaving, now." He grabbed his jacket. Patricia stood too. "Marcus, what's happening?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned toward me one last time. His eyes were no longer confident. They were searching, suspicious, calculating. "Claire, did you tell anyone about our finances?" The entire table watched, waiting for my answer. I held his gaze calmly and said something that made his paranoia grow instantly. "Marcus, if there's nothing wrong with your finances, why are you so worried?" He stared at me for a long moment. Then he turned away and walked out of the restaurant. Lauren rushed after him. Patricia followed in confusion. Daniel stayed behind. The room finally emptied. Just the two of us. Daniel looked at me quietly. "The audit started tonight, didn't it?" "Yes." He exhaled slowly. "Marcus is going to panic." I nodded. "Good, because when people panic, they make mistakes." Daniel looked toward the restaurant exit. "Marcus just realized something is wrong, but he still doesn't know what." I picked up my coat. That's the most dangerous moment for someone like him. Daniel tilted his head. "Why?" "Because right now Marcus believes there's still time to fix things." But the truth was something very different. The investors had already sent the first set of financial records to federal investigators, and the moment those investigators opened the files, they were going to find something Marcus forgot existed. A hidden backup server, one that recorded every financial transaction his company ever made, including the ones he thought he deleted. At 2:14 a.m., the same night Marcus stormed out of that restaurant, he logged into Sentinel Shield's financial system from his penthouse office. And that single login attempt triggered a security alert on 3 different monitoring systems. The investors' audit team saw it, the bank saw it, and somewhere inside a federal compliance database, his name quietly moved into a new category: active investigation. Before I continue, I want to ask you something. When someone realizes their plan is collapsing, do you think they become careful or reckless? Because what Marcus did that night told us exactly what kind of man he really was. I wasn't asleep when it happened. I was sitting on the couch in my living room with my laptop open. Victor Lang had connected me to the audit team earlier that evening. 3 analysts from Alderbridge Capital, 2 forensic accountants from an external consulting firm, and Daniel. We were all watching the same dashboard. It tracks Sentinel Shield's internal server activity. Normally, the system ran quietly, routine logins, automated backups, software updates. But at 2:14 a.m., a red alert appeared on the screen. Executive account access detected. Marcus Hale. Daniel leaned forward in his chair. "He's in the system." One of the analysts muttered something under his breath. Victor Lang joined the call seconds later. His voice was calm. "What is he doing?" Daniel opened the system activity log. "He's accessing financial archives, probably looking for evidence." Victor sighed quietly. "He knows the audit started." Of course he does. Marcus wasn't stupid. Arrogant, reckless, selfish, but not stupid. He understood exactly what an investor audit meant, which meant he was trying to erase something. The analyst began tracking his movements inside the system. Database access, file downloads, permission overrides. Then Daniel said something sharp. "Wait." Everyone leaned closer to their screens. Marcus just attempted a deletion command. "For which file?" Victor asked. Daniel checked. "Transaction history, 6 months of it." One of the auditors shook his head. Too late. Every backup server already mirrored that data. Marcus didn't know that. He kept moving through the system, trying different things, closing accounts, revoking internal permissions, downloading files. Then suddenly, his access stopped. Daniel frowned. "He's locked out." Victor's voice returned. "We just disabled executive privileges. Marcus no longer has system authority." Silence filled the call. Somewhere across the city, Marcus was probably staring at his screen in disbelief. But the most important part of the night hadn't happened yet, because the audit team had started reviewing the backup server data. That server stored something Marcus forgot about: automatic transaction logs. Every single financial movement, even the ones he tried to delete. The first analyst opened the file, scrolling through rows of transactions, dates, amounts, accounts. Then he stopped. "Hold on." Victor spoke immediately. "What is it?" The analyst enlarged one section of the ledger. "There's another offshore account." Daniel leaned closer. "What account?" The analyst pointed at the screen. "Cayman Trust Holdings. Total balance? $11.2 million. The call went silent. That amount was almost half the investor funding. Daniel shook his head slowly. That account wasn't in the system before. Victor's voice turned colder. Because it wasn't supposed to be discovered. Marcus had hidden it completely outside the company ledger. The analyst traced the transfers. Funds moved through multiple shell vendors, then quietly accumulated in the Cayman account. Lauren Bishop was listed as a secondary account contact, but the primary account holder was someone else. Victor read the name aloud. Rachel Whitmore, Marcus's attorney. The same lawyer structuring the offshore holding company. The same lawyer who helped buy Lauren's condo. And now the woman holding over $11 million in investor funds. Victor spoke quietly. "Now we understand the real plan." Daniel nodded slowly. Marcus wasn't planning to run the company. He was planning to strip it. The software, the investor money, then disappear with Rachel managing the legal exit. One of the analysts asked the obvious question: "Where is the money now?" Daniel checked the timestamp. Still in the Cayman account. Victor paused, then said something that made my pulse slow. "Good." Everyone looked at their screens. Victor continued. "Because once that money moves again, it becomes international fraud, which triggers automatic federal jurisdiction. And federal investigators move very fast when millions disappear overseas." The analysts began documenting everything: exporting transaction logs, recording account structures, building evidence packages. But something still bothered me. Marcus had tried to delete company records. He panicked. That part made sense. But he hadn't touched the Cayman account. Not yet, which meant something. I spoke for the first time in several minutes. "Marcus doesn't control that account." Victor understood immediately. "Rachel Whitmore does." "Exactly." Daniel leaned back slowly. "Which means Marcus isn't the final decision maker." Victor nodded. "Rachel is. And if Rachel realizes the audit is happening, she'll move the money immediately. That would make recovery much harder." The room fell quiet again, everyone thinking the same thing. Rachel Whitmore needed to be stopped before she transferred $11 million out of reach. Victor finally spoke. "We need to know where she is tonight." Daniel checked his phone. "Actually, I might know." Everyone looked at him. He turned the screen toward the camera. Rachel Whitmore's social media account. A photo posted 3 hours earlier. Location tag: Lake Geneva Resort, luxury retreat. About 90 minutes outside Chicago. Victor nodded slowly. "Celebrating," Daniel said. "Probably waiting for the asset transfer." I looked at the screen again. Rachel Whitmore stood beside a fireplace, holding a glass of champagne. Marcus stood next to her. Lauren, too. They looked relaxed, confident, completely unaware that the entire scheme had just been exposed. Victor finally said something very quiet. "We have a narrow window. If the money moves tomorrow, it becomes an international recovery case." Daniel asked the obvious question. "So what do we do?" Victor answered without hesitation. "We let Marcus believe he still has time. The more confident he feels, the more careless he'll become. And careless people reveal things investigators can prove." He turned his attention back to me. "Claire, yes. Marcus still trusts you more than anyone else right now." I almost laughed. Trust was not the word I would have chosen. Victor continued. He thinks you're weak. That makes you useful. What he meant was clear. Marcus needed to keep talking, keep explaining, keep revealing details, because every word could become evidence. But then Victor said something none of us expected. Tomorrow morning, Marcus is meeting someone. Daniel looked confused. Who? Victor checked another message on his phone. The lead federal investigator assigned to this case. Apparently, Marcus requested a meeting. The room went silent. Marcus wanted to talk to federal investigators, which meant something was about to change. And the question none of us could answer yet was this: was Marcus about to confess, or was he about to blame someone else? And if he blamed someone else, there was a very good chance that person would be me. At exactly 9:30 a.m. the next morning, Marcus Hale walked into a federal office building, carrying a leather briefcase and a story he believed would save his life. The story involved fraud, missing investor money, and a single person he intended to blame for everything: me. Before I continue, let me ask you something. If someone tried to frame you for a financial crime they committed, would you panic? Or would you let them talk long enough to destroy themselves? Because sometimes the smartest move is letting a liar keep speaking. The federal office building sat 6 blocks from the Chicago courthouse. Gray stone. No flashy signage, just quiet authority. Marcus arrived early. Daniel confirmed it through a contact inside the audit team. The lead investigator assigned to the case was a man named Thomas Garner, mid-40s, former IRS Criminal Division. The kind of investigator who had spent 20 years watching executives try to explain missing money. Marcus believed he was about to negotiate. Garner knew better. Inside the conference room, Marcus sat across from 2 investigators and a recording device. Garner started with a simple question. Mr. Hale, do you understand why we requested this meeting? Marcus nodded. Yes, there appear to be irregularities in our financial system. Our system. Marcus still spoke like he owned the company. Garner leaned back slightly. Can you explain those irregularities? Marcus opened his briefcase and removed a folder. Inside were printed financial reports, very carefully selected ones. He slid them across the table. My company recently discovered unauthorized transactions tied to an internal financial account. Garner looked at the documents quietly. Marcus continued. Those transactions were approved through credentials belonging to someone else. Garner looked up. Whose credentials? Marcus answered immediately. My wife, Claire Bennett. I heard the recording later. Victor's team obtained it legally once the investigation advanced. Marcus sounded confident, calm, like he had rehearsed every word. He told investigators that I had access to the accounting system through my consulting work, that I handled financial oversight during the early years of the company, that I became resentful after the divorce. He claimed I secretly authorized the transactions, then attempted to hide the money offshore. Classic deflection strategy. Blame the spouse, make the crime sound emotional. Investigators hear that story constantly. Garner didn't interrupt. He simply asked another question. Do you have proof? Marcus slid another document across the table. Digital authorization records. The same forged signatures we already knew about. Garner studied them for a moment. Then he asked something Marcus clearly didn't expect. And how exactly did Ms. Bennett access your executive approval system? Marcus hesitated for half a second, then answered. Shared credentials from earlier company operations. Garner nodded slowly. Shared credentials. Then he asked a second question. Who approved the offshore asset transfer to Cayman Trust Holdings? Marcus blinked. Just once. Because that account wasn't supposed to be discovered yet. He recovered quickly. Our corporate legal team. Garner nodded again. Which attorney? Marcus answered carefully. Rachel Whitmore. The investigator made a small note on his pad, then leaned forward slightly. Mr. Hale, are you aware that Ms. Whitmore is listed as the primary holder of the Cayman Trust account? Marcus froze. Only for a moment, but investigators notice moments like that. He quickly adjusted his posture. That account was created for asset protection. Standard legal structure. Garner didn't react. He simply asked one more question. And where exactly did the $11 million inside that account originate? Marcus opened his mouth, closed it again, then answered. Company reserves. Garner slid a new document across the table. It was a printout from the backup server, a complete transaction record, the one Marcus tried to delete at 2:14 a.m. Marcus stared at the page. Garner spoke calmly. These funds were transferred through 12 shell vendors over 8 months. Many of those vendors do not exist. Marcus's breathing slowed. The confidence in his voice began to crack. He tried a new angle. My wife works in financial investigations. She understands how to structure complex transfers. Garner nodded. Yes, she does. And according to the evidence she provided, she also documented every one of those transfers. Marcus's head snapped up. What? Garner folded his hands. Mr. Hale, your wife contacted Alderbridge Capital 2 days ago. She provided a full forensic analysis of your company's transaction records. Marcus stared at him, silent. Garner continued, including documentation of the property purchase used to hide corporate funds. Lauren Bishop's condominium, purchased through Patricia Hale. Marcus's face went completely white. That transfer trail is very clear, Garner said. The room went quiet. For the first time in the meeting, Marcus had no response ready. His entire strategy depended on investigators believing he discovered the fraud first. But that narrative had already collapsed. Garner leaned back slightly. There's something else you should understand. Marcus looked up slowly. Your login activity last night triggered a system alert, which means we now have a record of you attempting to delete company financial archives. Marcus's voice dropped. I was reviewing internal files. Garner nodded again. Of course. Then he asked the final question. Mr. Hale, do you still want to continue this conversation as a voluntary interview? Or would you prefer to speak with legal counsel present? Marcus didn't answer immediately, because at that moment, he realized something terrible. He wasn't controlling the situation anymore. The investigators already had the evidence, and the person he planned to blame had spoken first. Marcus finally leaned back in his chair. His voice sounded different now, much quieter. I think I should call my lawyer. Garner nodded calmly. That's probably a good idea. The recording ended there, but the most important part happened 30 minutes later, because when Marcus called Rachel Whitmore, she didn't answer. Not once, not twice, not 3 times. By the 4th call, Marcus realized something. Rachel Whitmore wasn't picking up his calls. And when he opened his banking app again, the Cayman Trust account balance no longer showed $11 million. It showed 0. Rachel Whitmore had just moved the money and disappeared. On Friday evening, exactly 4 days after Marcus tried to blame me in a federal interview, he walked into the largest ballroom at the Palmer House Hotel, expecting applause. The stage lights were already on. 200 investors were seated. A giant screen behind him displayed one number, $45 million, the valuation he had been promising everyone. Before I continue, I want to ask you something. If the person who betrayed you was about to publicly celebrate success built on lies, would you expose them immediately? Or wait until the entire room was watching? Because timing is everything when the truth finally comes out. Marcus believed this event would save him. He called it the Sentinel Shield Strategic Acquisition Gala. The goal was simple: convince investors the company was thriving, secure new funding, use that money to quietly cover the missing millions. Classic damage control. He didn't know 3 important things. First, Rachel Whitmore had already disappeared with the offshore account funds. Second, Alderbridge Capital had frozen the remaining company accounts. And third, every federal investigator working the case was already inside the building. They were just waiting. I arrived at the ballroom at 7:40 p.m. Not as Marcus's wife, not as a guest, as someone invited by the investors. Victor Lang met me near the back entrance. He looked calm, almost amused. "You ready?" I nodded. "Marcus has no idea what's coming," Victor said. "Good, because arrogant men only reveal their worst mistakes when they think they're winning." The ballroom slowly filled. Executives, journalists, investors, Chicago business reporters. The stage looked like something from a tech conference. Massive screen, spotlights, glass podium, Sentinel Shield's logo rotating slowly behind it. At 8:05 p.m., Marcus walked on stage. The applause was loud. He looked confident again. Dark suit, perfect smile. Lauren sat at the front table, wearing a silver dress that sparkled under the lights. Patricia Hale sat beside her, looking proud. Marcus raised his hands. "Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight." His voice echoed through the ballroom. For the past 6 years, Sentinel Shield has been building the future of cybersecurity. The crowd listened politely. Marcus continued. "Tonight, we take the next step. A strategic partnership that values this company at $45 million. The screen behind him flashed the number again. Some investors clapped. Lauren smiled proudly. Marcus spoke for almost 10 minutes, about growth, about innovation, about leadership. Not a single mention of the missing money. Then he reached the part of the speech he had been waiting for. He looked directly at Lauren and smiled. "None of this would have been possible without the incredible woman beside me." Lauren stood up slightly. The audience applauded politely. Marcus continued. "Lauren helped me see the bigger vision, the future. And tonight, we begin that future together." More applause. Then Marcus said something he would regret for the rest of his life. "Before we finalize the new investment agreement, I want to assure everyone that Sentinel Shield's financial position is stronger than ever." Victor Lang quietly leaned toward me and whispered, "That's the lie we needed." Marcus continued speaking. "Our accounts are secure, our technology is ready, and our leadership team—" That's when Victor stood up. The sound of his chair moving across the floor echoed in the quiet room. Marcus stopped talking. Victor Lang, the largest investor in the company, walking toward the stage. Marcus tried to smile. Victor, perfect timing. Victor climbed the stage steps slowly. Marcus handed him the microphone, expecting a congratulatory speech. Victor didn't smile. Instead, he looked directly at the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, there will be no acquisition tonight." The room went silent. Marcus blinked. "What?" Victor continued calmly. 4 days ago, Alderbridge Capital initiated a financial audit of Sentinel Shield Technologies. Several investors shifted in their seats. Marcus's smile began to fade. Victor spoke clearly. That audit revealed more than $11 million in unauthorized transfers from company accounts. The room erupted with whispers. Marcus stepped toward Victor. "This is a misunderstanding." Victor raised his hand. "No, it isn't." Then he pressed a small remote in his hand. The giant screen behind them changed. The Sentinel Shield logo vanished, replaced by a spreadsheet. Transaction records, shell vendors, transfer routes. Marcus's face turned pale. Victor continued. These transfers were routed through 12 fraudulent vendor accounts before being moved offshore. Gasps filled the room. Marcus grabbed the microphone. "This is false!" Victor didn't even look at him. One of those transfers was used to purchase a $1.2 million condominium. The screen changed again. Lauren's condo address appeared. Lauren stopped smiling. Victor turned to face Marcus directly. "Care to explain that purchase, Mr. Hale?" Marcus looked at the audience, then at Lauren, then back at Victor. He laughed nervously. "This is corporate restructuring." Another voice interrupted. "Actually, it's wire fraud." Everyone turned. 3 federal agents were walking down the center aisle of the ballroom, badges visible. Marcus stepped back. The lead agent climbed the stage. "Marcus Hale, you are under investigation for securities fraud, wire fraud, and financial conspiracy involving Sentinel Shield Technologies." The room exploded with noise. Cameras flashed. Lauren looked like she might faint. Patricia grabbed Marcus's arm. "This is ridiculous." Marcus stared at the agents, then at Victor. Then slowly, his eyes moved across the room until they landed on me, standing beside the stage, watching quietly. The expression on his face changed instantly. Denial, then anger, then realization. "You," he whispered. I didn't answer. I simply looked at him calmly, because the collapse had only just begun. And Marcus still didn't know the worst part. The $11 million he thought Rachel Whitmore stole had already been traced, and the next person the investigators wanted to question was Lauren Bishop. 3 minutes after the federal agents walked onto that stage, the ballroom that was supposed to celebrate a $45 million deal turned into a crime scene. 200 investors sat frozen in their chairs. Journalists stopped pretending to take polite notes. And Marcus Hale finally realized that the empire he built on lies had just collapsed in front of everyone who mattered. Before we finish this story, I want to ask you something. If someone who humiliated you publicly suddenly realized you were the one holding the truth, would you speak immediately, or would you let them destroy themselves first? Because what happened next was something Marcus did entirely on his own. The lead federal agent introduced himself calmly. Special Agent Thomas Garner. Marcus's shoulders stiffened the moment he heard the name. They had already met, just 2 days earlier. The ballroom was silent now. Garner held a folder in his hand. "Mr. Hale," he said clearly, "we need to ask you a few questions regarding several financial transfers connected to Sentinel Shield Technologies." Marcus tried to recover. His voice sounded strained. "This is completely inappropriate. You're interrupting a corporate event." Garner didn't react. Instead, he turned slightly and nodded toward the giant screen. The spreadsheet of transactions was still displayed behind them. 12 shell vendors, 8 months of transfers, $11 million missing. Garner spoke again. "You attempted to explain these transactions during our meeting earlier this week." Marcus swallowed. His eyes darted across the crowd. Investors, reporters, his parents, Lauren, and finally, me. His expression hardened instantly. Claire did this. The words came out quickly, too quickly. He pointed toward me. "She had access to the financial system. She's the one who moved the money." Gasps spread through the audience. Lauren grabbed Marcus's arm. "Marcus, what are you saying?" He pulled away from her. Garner watched quietly. Marcus continued. "My wife works in financial investigations. She manipulated our internal systems. She forged my approval." The room buzzed with whispers. Garner opened the folder slowly. Then he said something very simple. "Mr. Hale, we already verified Miss Bennett's timeline." Marcus froze. Garner continued. "Her login credentials were copied from your executive office computer, time-stamped 11 months ago." Marcus shook his head. "That's impossible." Garner pulled another document from the folder. System security footage. Marcus Hale accessing the executive terminal at 11:47 p.m., the same night the credentials were duplicated. Marcus stared at the paper. The room had gone completely silent. Lauren stepped backward slowly. Patricia whispered something under her breath. Garner spoke again, and while we're discussing timelines, he flipped to another page. The purchase of Ms. Bishop's condominium occurred 8 months ago, funded through a consulting payment to Patricia Hale. Marcus's mother gasped. Garner didn't raise his voice, but every word carried through the room. That payment originated from Sentinel Shield's operating account, which means company funds were used to purchase personal property. Lauren's face went pale. Marcus tried to interrupt. That was a bonus structure. Garner raised his hand. "Mr. Hale, the problem with financial crimes is that numbers don't lie." The screen behind them changed again, this time showing the Cayman Trust account. $11 million transferred offshore. Marcus's breathing became shallow. Garner continued calmly. Earlier today, we confirmed that account was opened under the legal authority of Rachel Whitmore, your corporate attorney. Marcus's head snapped up. She stole the money. There it was. The final defense. Blame the lawyer. Garner nodded slowly. That possibility is currently under investigation. But the transaction approvals still originated from Sentinel Shield's internal accounts. Marcus tried again. Rachel handled the asset transfers. She told me it was legal. Garner studied him carefully. So your defense is that you transferred $11 million from investor accounts without confirming the legality of the process? Marcus opened his mouth. No words came out, because every option was bad. Admit he knew. Or admit he was reckless enough to sign financial transfers he didn't understand. Garner closed the folder. Mr. Hale, you're welcome to explain all of this with your attorney present, but at this moment, we're officially opening a federal investigation into Sentinel Shield Technologies. The words echoed through the ballroom. Federal investigation. The reporters began typing immediately. Lauren looked at Marcus like she was seeing him for the first time. Patricia's hands were shaking. Marcus turned toward me again. His voice was hoarse now. You did this. I met his gaze calmly. Marcus, you did this. Victor Lang stepped forward beside the stage, addressing the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, Alderbridge Capital will be cooperating fully with investigators. Sentinel Shield operations are suspended, effective immediately. The crowd erupted. Investors shouting, reporters pushing forward, cameras flashing. Garner turned to Marcus one last time. Mr. Hale, please remain available for further questioning. Marcus didn't move. He just stood there, on the stage where he expected applause, under the lights he thought would celebrate him, now surrounded by whispers and cameras. Lauren slowly stepped away from him, one step, then another, until she was no longer standing beside him at all. Marcus watched her go, and in that moment, the arrogance finally disappeared, because the truth had arrived, and it arrived quietly, not with revenge, not with screaming, just evidence and silence. But the story wasn't finished yet, because 6 months later, Marcus Hale would stand in another room. Not a ballroom, a courtroom, and the judge was about to reveal exactly how expensive arrogance can be. 6 months after the night Marcus tried to celebrate his success in that ballroom, he stood in a federal courtroom, wearing a gray suit that suddenly looked much cheaper than it used to. The number that mattered now wasn't 45 million, it was 12. 12 years. That was the sentence the prosecution recommended for financial fraud involving $11 million in investor funds. Before I finish this story, I want to ask you something. When someone who betrayed you finally faces the consequences of their own choices, do you feel victory or peace? Because what I felt that day was not what most people expect. The courtroom was quiet. No champagne, no investors, no applause. Just a judge, a prosecutor, Marcus's defense attorney, and a handful of people sitting in the gallery. Victor Lang was there. Daniel Cruz, too. I sat in the back row. Marcus avoided looking at me. During the trial, the evidence unfolded exactly the way forensic cases usually do. Slowly, methodically. Every financial record, every transfer, every shell vendor. The prosecution showed the jury the transaction logs we discovered on the backup servers. They showed the purchase of Lauren's condo. They showed the Cayman Trust account, and they showed the moment Marcus attempted to delete company records at 2:14 a.m. Numbers tell stories better than witnesses ever can, and Marcus's numbers told a very clear one. The defense tried to argue Rachel Whitmore orchestrated the offshore transfers, that she manipulated Marcus into approving complex financial structures, that he didn't understand the full scope of the transactions. But the emails destroyed that argument, because Marcus wrote them, and in those messages, he explained exactly what he planned to do. Move assets offshore, secure the intellectual property, then walk away with the money. Rachel Whitmore was still missing when the trial started, but 3 weeks before the final hearing, Authorities located her in Portugal. The $11 million were still in the Cayman Trust account, frozen, recovered. And when Rachel realized the investigation had caught up to her, she made a deal. She testified. Not because she felt guilty, because she wanted a reduced sentence. Her testimony lasted 3 hours, and during those 3 hours, she described Marcus's plan in precise detail. How he wanted to drain Sentinel Shield before the next funding round. How he believed investors wouldn't notice until it was too late. And how he rushed the divorce because he wanted to isolate liability. The courtroom listened in complete silence. When she finished, Marcus looked 10 years older. The man who once bragged about retiring before 40 now looked like someone who had never imagined consequences existed. When the jury returned their verdict, it took less than 4 hours. Guilty, on all major counts: wire fraud, securities fraud, financial conspiracy. The sentencing hearing came a month later. Marcus stood in front of the judge without the confidence he once carried into boardrooms. The judge spoke slowly. Mr. Hale, corporate fraud on this scale damages more than financial institutions. It damages trust, investors, employees, entire communities. He paused, then continued. The court sentences you to 12 years in federal prison. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. That was it. The moment his future changed permanently. He didn't argue, he didn't shout, he just stood there. When the hearing ended, people slowly left the courtroom. Victor shook my hand. Daniel hugged me quietly. Marcus walked past the gallery, escorted by federal officers. For a second, he looked toward me. Not with anger, not with arrogance, just emptiness. But the story didn't end in that courtroom. 3 months later, Sentinel Shield's intellectual property was sold to a cybersecurity firm in Seattle. The new owners kept most of the employees. Daniel became the company's new technical director. The investors recovered nearly 70% of their losses. Lauren's condo was seized as part of the financial recovery. Last I heard, she moved back to Florida. Patricia Hale sold her suburban house to cover legal fees. She never contacted me again. As for Rachel Whitmore, she received a reduced sentence after cooperating with investigators. 7 years. The legal system tends to reward the first person who talks. And my life? It became something very different. After the trial, my consulting firm promoted me to senior investigative partner. Corporate fraud cases increased. Companies hire people who can dismantle complex financial schemes. And apparently, I had proven I could do exactly that. But the biggest change wasn't professional. It was personal. I sold the Lincoln Park townhouse a few months after the trial ended. Not because I needed the money, because I didn't need the memories. I moved into a quiet apartment overlooking Lake Michigan. Smaller, simpler, peaceful. One evening, I sat on the balcony, watching the sun set over the water, the city lights slowly turning on. And I realized something important. Revenge wasn't what destroyed Marcus. His own arrogance did that. All I did was refuse to stay silent when the truth appeared in front of me. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with shouting or drama. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in spreadsheets, in documents, in numbers that refuse to lie. If you made it all the way through this story, I'd really love to hear something from you. Have you ever had someone underestimate you so badly that it eventually became their biggest mistake? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about quiet strength, betrayal, and the kind of justice that unfolds slowly but powerfully, make sure you like the video and subscribe. Because there are many more stories like this one. And sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who stays quiet long enough to see everything.